Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Cari Mozur, who serves as Senior Vice President of Relationship Development for Americans for the Arts. Cari, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'm so excited to be here today.
So I am so excited to talk to you because as a Senior Vice President of Relationship Development, I'm thinking that you're working in fundraising. But what I'd love is if you could kind of initially just kind of share, kind of your role, because relationship development, advancement, et cetera, it's sometimes defined differently at different organizations. You come to us with a breadth of experience, not only recently and very, very recently at Americans for the Arts, but also a host of other organizations. So you come to this with tremendous experience. So wondering if just first you could share kind of what is the scope of that work as the, SVP of relationship development at AFTA.
Yeah, of course. So coming into this role, I actually wear two hats. And one of them is as part of the executive team, where I work very closely with Nolan Bivens, our president and CEO, and actually a recent guest of yours, to sort of...
I was saying absolutely, and Nolan's been so wonderful and really helped drive our wonderful partnership with AFTA, where AFTA is one of our creative partners, helped us to co-curate this show and especially talk about obviously such an important issue. So yes, great.
Yeah, no, he's wonderful, and I work closely with him in driving forward AFTA's work. So really taking the ideas that are sort of floating around and how are we doing things in a new and different way and putting them into action and really starting to move forward. So that's one of the hats that I wear. The other one is, as you identified earlier, really close to fundraising. I do a lot of fundraising in my role, and it's really thinking about it in a new and different way. How do we raise money in a sustainable and equitable way? That's really important, especially as we look at the arts. Philanthropy looks different to different people, and it could be $1 million gifts, which is wonderful, and we always like to see that, but it can also be those smaller gifts that help support so many missions across the country.
Absolutely. So this is such important work. One of the things I often tell my arts entrepreneurship students, I'm like, you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the resources to be able to, realize it, then it's just a pipe dream. Meanwhile, if you have a mediocre idea, but all of the funding and resources, you're going to be able to probably do it. So in other words, the resources are so important. Wondering from both, of course, at Americans for the Arts, but also previously working in opera and theater, host of different capacities, is there first just general strategies that you have found, this works as one thinks about both? It could be relating to the balance of small donors and the $1 million gifts. Do you kind of view the traditional pyramid as the kind of best strategy? Anything that you could share with us about kind of the overarching strategies that you bring to bear or that you find really work well?
Yeah, I will say that the strategy that I think has been tried and true and has always worked for me is really being donor-centric, to be listening to your donors, listening to the community members that want to participate, and to really think about philanthropy, again, as I said, as a spectrum. Folks, a gift that is maybe, $100, it can be as meaningful and as impactful to somebody as somebody who's giving a larger amount of money. So it's really being donor-centric, listening to your donors, understanding what about your mission makes them tick, building those relationships, because I think that so often we can move forward with donors where you sort of decide for them what their entry point is into your organization, and you sort of treat them in that way. But what I've found in my career is if you take a moment to step back and listen to their story and listen to why they love your organization, you're going to move so much further. And I've seen it time and time again where folks really get engaged in that way, because there's so many facets to so many organizations, and just listening to folks gets you moving forward a little bit more.
Totally, totally. And I especially love, right, about the stories. In other words, we all, and especially as we think about advocating for organizations, we're weaving those stories about our work, but all of those donors have their own stories that they want to share with us. And so you kind of capturing that, I thought that really hit home. One thing, kind of trying to go a little deeper into this, right? I am sure there is probably someone in fundraising watching this show right now and saying, well, that's, it's great to be able to focus on the $50 or $100 contributions and the million, but I have to focus on these big gifts. I don't have time. I just have to kind of not give short shrift to the smaller donors, but wondering, how do you balance functionally with the hours in a day? Is there any systems or technology or other things that you utilize so that you can kind of have that donor-centric approach across the entire spectrum, but also give that huge lead time that's probably involved for the 6-7-figure gifts, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. With when you start looking at major donors, it's a lot more hands-on touching. You're really thinking about the individual and how you can connect with them, and that's so important. And it does take a lot of time. And as you're looking at sort of a portfolio that has a number of different folks in it, one of the ways you can really hone in is by using data. Make data your friend. There are ways to make appeals and outreach really feel personal. It doesn't have to be, direct mail works so well because people really believe when they receive a letter from your ED or from your CEO that it's coming from them, that person thought of them and was writing something out to them to ask them specifically. So I think really leaning into data when you're in a smaller team that maybe doesn't have the bandwidth, and sort of using some of the strategies that you think about with major donors, but sort of making them a little bit broader for your smaller folks. And then that gives you some time back to really get to know your major donors and to focus really closely on how you can move that relationship forward, and what ways they would ideally like to be involved. You mentioned stories earlier. So many things run on stories. Advocacy runs on stories. Understanding what is the impact, how are you making a difference, that really is going to move your donors too.
Absolutely. And do you find kind of, and just in the brief time so far that you've been at Americans for the Arts, is there a bit of a difference in terms of either the stories that you're telling or the approach than, say, independent, singular organizations, right, that are a specific opera company or orchestra or et cetera? Do you find that kind of the representing now the breadth of all of the arts in our country, has that shifted at all, or evolved any of your ways in which you have to approach fundraising?
Yeah, it has. I think that there is when you're working for an arts organization, you're having something. So I've spent my career in performing arts, and you have very clearly a season. You have you have pillars throughout the year where there's performances and you can engage around that. And it's certainly different when you're looking at advocacy, but it's different and exciting. It is all of those things, right? So all of the folks across the country who are supporting arts organizations are folks who love the arts, and how do we tell the story of the advocacy work that we're doing at AFTA really is helping to move policy so that we're supporting arts organizations and artists. So it's telling the story from sort of a zoomed out view, which has been really wonderful and exciting.
Awesome, awesome. And so a lot of people too are talking about, and especially now with some recent upticks in in the presence of COVID, whether things are different, right? And kind of what's being reinvented post-COVID versus before, things like that. Is there anything that you've found has kind of changed in fundraising, in donor engagement from kind of before the pandemic to after? Any differences in the ways in which you outreach or the ways in which you communicate, or just systems at all that you deploy?
Yeah, one of the things that we've really noticed is that it's so much easier. It's both easier and harder to engage with folks. Zoom has become, ubiquitous. So saying, having the ability to say to a donor, like, let's just jump on a Zoom call. I'd love to talk to you and hear a little bit more from you about, any given thing is so easy. And it's a really good way to engage with donors who you may have otherwise needed to jump on a plane or a train to go visit. So that's really wonderful because it connects you in a much stronger way. I will also say that I've seen that donors feel much more engaged with the organizations that they support. They really, my experience was they really decided that they wanted to make sure that these organizations survived, and ways in which they connected changed, but they're still so excited about it. So instead of maybe going into a theater, they can see something from their laptop on their couch, and that's been really great because they're folks who have accessibility issues or maybe are a little further and they can't drive maybe 2 hours just to come to your venue. So this ability to be in touch over the internet has really changed things, and that's just a great way to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find, is there a benefit, or are you anticipating any kind of challenges where I would think, orchestra or opera company, you connect a donor like, here, see this performance, and you have that. But kind of after performing, if you will, is often in halls of Congress or in collaborations with many, many, many partners, and all of this type of work that often doesn't lend itself to an audience watching all of it. How do you think about that, or is that part of the strategy that you have to incorporate?
Yeah, well, at AFTA, we believe that arts is important across the country, that every American deserves the right to have art in their community. And I think the answer is yes. I think that, as we're able to share with folks across the country that the work that we do impacts them on a local level, that's the same thing for us. So it's sharing with them, how can you make a difference in policies that are being created? Americans are able to be in touch with their senators, be in touch with their congressmen, and that allows them to really make advocacy their work too. So one of the things that I think is incredible about AFTA is that we are able to give people the tools to impact change, and we do that, both through local arts agencies and through the community work that we do.
Awesome. Absolutely incredible. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, this work at times, and I would think especially in fundraising, right, there's got to be some challenging days. There's days where it seems like donors just aren't connecting, or there could be other frustrations, or people, managing teams of people, et cetera. And just wondering, where do you either turn for strength, for inspiration during the toughest of times as an administrative leader?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's reflecting back on the art that really gives us purpose, right? For me, it's looking at what beauty is there in the world that artists at every level are creating, and how impactful that is to communities, right? So it's a matter of looking at the arts through the lens of social impact, economic impact, educational impact, social impact. All of these things are ways that artists can really use their medium to make a lens for changing the world. And that's really powerful. And I think that anybody who loves the arts loves to see that in action in the world. So that's where I look at.
Cari Mozur, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.